The war room fell silent as another red marker blinked out on the holographic display. Commander Vexlar watched the light fade, knowing it represented 3,000 souls aboard the carrier Infinite Dawn. His 4 eyes closed slowly. A gesture of mourning among his people. The Devourers had claimed another victory. "How many ships do we have left?" Vexlar asked. Though he already knew the answer would hurt. His tactical officer, a young Kryn named Pelton, checked the readings. 42 combat-ready vessels, Commander. Another 18 are damaged but mobile. We've lost 60% of our fleet in the last 3 weeks. 60%. The number sat heavy in the room like a physical weight. The Galactic Coalition had been fighting the Devourers for 3 generations now. But never had the losses been this severe. These creatures, these monsters from the dark edges of space, seemed endless. They consumed entire worlds, breaking down all organic matter to fuel their expansion. No negotiation was possible, no surrender accepted. They simply devoured everything in their path. "We need to retreat," Vexlar said finally. The words tasted like defeat, but he was a practical commander. Dead heroes saved no one. "Retreat where?" asked Science Officer Liranel, her pale blue skin flickering with stress patterns. "The Devourers have cut off every major route back to Coalition space. We're trapped in the Outer Rim." Vexlar studied the star map, his experienced eyes searching for any path, any option they had missed. His gaze drifted to the eastern edge of the map, where a large section of space was marked in gray with warning symbols. "The quarantine zone. What about there?" He pointed. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Pelton's crest flared in alarm. "Commander, that's forbidden space. The quarantine zone has been sealed for 2,000 years. No ship that enters has ever returned. Perhaps that's exactly why the Devourers won't follow," Vexlar said quietly. Liranel stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. "The old records say that zone was sealed after a great war, a war so terrible that the species involved chose to lock themselves away rather than continue fighting." "I've heard stories about that war," said an older officer, Commander Torvus of the Auxiliary Fleet. His species, the Mendax, were known for their long memories and love of history. Ancient tales, probably half myth by now. They say the war was fought by a species called humans. Several officers made gestures to ward off bad luck. The name, human, was whispered in the same way one might speak of ghosts or demons. Vexlar had heard the stories as a young cadet, tales told to frighten new recruits or teach them caution. Humans were said to be violent beyond reason. Torvas continued, warming to his subject. The stories claim they felt emotions so strongly that it drove them to madness in battle. They would fight when any rational species would surrender. They would sacrifice themselves for no logical purpose. They created weapons that could crack planets and burn stars. And they were also said to be kind and creative. Liranel added softly. The complete records describe them as contradictions, capable of great beauty and terrible destruction. Artists and warriors in the same body. The myths say they scared themselves so badly with their own capacity for violence that they chose to vanish rather than inflict themselves on the galaxy. "Myths and legends," Pelton said dismissively. "Useful for scaring children, but we're dealing with a real threat now." Vexlar wasn't so sure. In his long military career, he had learned that most myths contained seeds of truth. Someone had sealed off that massive section of space. Something had made even the ancient coalition so nervous that they maintained the quarantine for 2 millennia. And recently, he had noticed something curious. "Liranel, pull up the Devourer movement patterns for the last 6 months," he ordered. The science officer's fingers danced over her console. A new map appeared, showing the swarm-like progression of the Devourer fleet across the Outer Rim. Red arrows indicated their advance, methodical and relentless. But there were gaps in the pattern. "Look here." Vexlar pointed to several areas near the quarantine zone boundary. "These systems offer strategic value. resources, positioning. Everything the Devourers usually target, but they've avoided them entirely. They go around, even when it costs them time and distance. The room fell quiet as the officers studied the map. It was true. The Devourers, who had never shown fear or hesitation before, were deliberately avoiding anything close to the quarantine zone. What could make them afraid? Pelton wondered aloud. Maybe the same thing that made our ancestors afraid, Torvas said. Maybe the myths aren't just myths. Vexlar made his decision. He had been a commander long enough to trust his instincts, and every instinct told him that the quarantine zone represented their only chance. It was a desperate gamble, but desperation was all they had left. Set course for the quarantine zone boundary, he ordered. We'll use it as a shield. If the Devourers follow, we'll cross into the zone itself. Commander, that's... Pelton started to protest. Suicide. Vexlar finished. Perhaps. But staying here is certain death. At least this way. We have a chance. Maybe the stories are true. Maybe something in that zone still guards its borders. Or maybe we'll find empty space and buy ourselves time to repair and regroup. The fleet began to turn, 42 battered ships limping toward forbidden space. Behind them, the Devourer swarm detected the movement and gave chase. The creatures seemed agitated, their formations becoming erratic as they realized where the coalition ships were heading. As they approached the boundary, marked by ancient warning beacons that still pulsed after 2,000 years, Vexlar stood on his command deck and thought about the stories. Humans. The word felt strange even in his thoughts. A species so dangerous they exiled themselves. So powerful, they had held off an entire galaxy. So broken, they chose isolation over conquest. Crossing the boundary in 60 seconds, Pelton announced, his voice tight with tension. Vexlar watched the invisible line approach on his displays. Somewhere behind that barrier, if the myths were true, an entire species had been hiding for 2,000 years. Hiding, waiting, watching. What would they think of strangers bringing war to their doorstep? May the ancestors forgive us, Torvas whispered. The first ship crossed into the quarantine zone. Then, another. Then the entire fleet, sliding past the ancient boundary like ghosts entering a forbidden temple. And behind them, after a moment of hesitation, the Devourer swarm followed, their hunger overcoming their ancient fear. The hunt had entered new territory, and somewhere in the darkness ahead, something was about to notice. The quarantine zone was not empty. Vexlar realized this within the first hour of crossing the boundary. His sensors picked up debris fields, ancient and new. Pieces of ships that didn't match any known design floated in the darkness. Some wreckage looked thousands of years old, but other pieces were fresh, still radiating heat from recent battles. Someone's been fighting here, Liranel said, her voice filled with wonder and fear. These debris patterns suggest conflicts within the last few months. Fighting who? Pelton asked. The zone has been sealed. There shouldn't be anyone here, except whoever sealed themselves inside. Vexlar finished. An alarm blared across the bridge. The Devourers had crossed the boundary and were accelerating toward the coalition fleet. Whatever ancient fear had made them hesitate was now forgotten. Hunger drove them forward. Prepare for, Vexlar began, but Liranel cut him off. Commander, I'm receiving a transmission. Audio only. The language it's archaic. Computer is trying to translate. 80. Computer is trying to translate. 80. Static filled the bridge, followed by a voice. It spoke in a language that sounded harsh and quick, full of sharp consonants. The computer struggled, pulling from databases that hadn't been accessed in 2 millennia. Words began to form. Broken. And uncertain. Unknown. Vessels, you have entered protected space. State, your purpose, or be removed. Protected space. Someone was still here. Someone who considered this zone theirs. Open a channel. Vexlar ordered. This is Commander Vexlar of the Galactic Coalition. We are fleeing an enemy force. We mean no harm and request safe passage. Silence answered him. Then the sensors lit up with a new contact. A ship was approaching from an asteroid field they had just passed. It had been there the whole time, hidden, watching them. The vessel was small, perhaps a third the size of Vexlar's flagship. But it looked wrong, somehow. The hull showed signs of modification upon modification. Technology from a dozen different eras and species had been grafted together. Scorch marks covered the armor. This ship had seen many battles. Reading weapons systems, Pelton reported. They're active, targeting us. The transmission came again. Clearer this time as the computer learned the language patterns. You bring war to our borders. The swarm follows you. Explain quickly, or I will consider you hostile. A video feed suddenly appeared on the main display. Vexlar found himself staring at a being he had never seen before, except in ancient artistic renderings. 2 eyes, forward-facing like a predator, hair the color of dark soil, skin in a shade of brown that reminded him of certain desert worlds. The being wore a worn uniform, covered in unknown insignia and weapons. A human. He was looking at an actual human. I am Captain Lisa Martinez of the Earth Reconnaissance Division, the human said. Her translator was better than theirs, her words clear and precise. You've entered human space without authorization, and you've brought the swarm with you. The swarm? Vexlar asked. That's what we call them, Lisa said, her eyes moving to look at something off-screen. The Devourers, you call them. They're almost here. You have 60 seconds to decide if you trust me or not. Trust you to do what? Lisa smiled, and Vexlar understood why ancient species had feared humans. The expression showed teeth, like a predator before a kill. To save your lives. Every ship, full power to your shields. Don't fire unless I give the signal. Understand? Quote. Vexlar made a choice based on instinct. We understand. All ships, raise shields, and hold fire. Lisa nodded once. Good. Welcome to the neighborhood. She touched something out of view. Wake up the others. The space around the Coalition fleet came alive. Ships decloaked. Dozens of them, appearing from nowhere like ghosts becoming solid. They had been there all along, invisible, surrounding the Coalition fleet since it entered the zone. Every vessel looked like Lisa's, cobbled together from mismatched parts but bristling with weapons. The Devourers arrived seconds later, their formation spreading like a disease across space. They outnumbered the humans and Coalition ships combined. But they didn't charge immediately. For the first time Vexlar had ever witnessed, the Devourers hesitated. They remember us, Lisa said quietly. Genetic memory. Somewhere in their corrupted minds, they remember what we did to them. You've fought them before? Vexlar asked. Not me personally, but my species did, a long time ago. Lisa's expression hardened. All ships, engage, protect the Coalition vessels. Show these things why they should have stayed away. The human ships moved unlike anything Vexlar had ever seen. They didn't maintain careful formations or follow standard tactical doctrine. Each vessel seemed to operate independently. Yet they worked together like a single organism. One ship would dart forward, drawing fire, while 2 others flanked from impossible angles. They moved close, too close, using the Devourer's own size against them. Lisa's ship accelerated directly at a Devourer cruiser. Vexlar thought she would fire missiles or energy weapons. Instead, at the last possible moment, she turned hard and raked her hull along the enemy's sensor array, physically scraping it off like removing barnacles from a ship. What is she doing? Pelton gasped. Whatever works, Liranel said, her voice filled with awe. Another human vessel, damaged and leaking atmosphere, didn't retreat. Instead, It accelerated toward a cluster of smaller Devourer ships and detonated its reactor. The explosion took out 6 enemy vessels. They sacrificed themselves, Torvas said. They bought time for others, Vexlar corrected, beginning to understand. The battle raged for 20 minutes. The humans fought with a combination of advanced technology and brutal improvisation. They used weapons the Coalition had never seen, some that looked homemade or adapted from captured enemy technology. When their shields failed, they kept fighting. When their weapons ran dry, they rammed. And slowly, impossibly, the Devourers began to retreat. The swarm that had chased the Coalition fleet across 3 sectors, that had never shown fear or hesitation, withdrew from human space. Lisa's face reappeared on the screen. She had a cut above one eye, bleeding red blood. They'll be back eventually, but we've got some time. My ship will guide you to a safe harbor. We need to talk, Commander. We need to talk about a lot of things. You're really human, Vexlar said, the words coming out before he could stop them. Lisa's expression softened slightly. Yeah, we're really human. And you're really Coalition. I recognize your ship designs from the old databases. You're the descendants of the species we knew before the quarantine. She paused. We've been watching your war from afar, monitored your broadcasts, tracked the Devourer expansion. We've been debating whether to break silence. And now? Now you've brought the war to our doorstep. The decision's been made for us. Lisa looked tired suddenly, older than she had seemed. Follow my ship. There's a station 3 hours from here. We'll dock, and I'll introduce you to some people. People who have a lot of questions about why we should get involved in a galactic war after spending 2,000 years trying to forget we were ever part of the galaxy. Vexlar watched the human ships form up around his battered fleet. They moved with casual confidence, like predators who owned this territory absolutely. The myths had been true. Humans had been here all along, hidden behind their self-imposed prison, watching and waiting. But what were they waiting for? And what would happen now that the waiting was over? His fleet followed the humans deeper into the quarantine zone, into forbidden space, into the territory of a species that had scared itself so badly it chose exile over existence. Vexlar had thought he was leading his people to sanctuary. He was beginning to realize he might have awakened something far more dangerous than the Devourers. The human station hung in space like a fortress built from scrap and determination. Vexlar counted at least 15 different architectural styles grafted together, along with what looked like captured Devourer technology integrated into the defense systems. Nothing about it should work, but somehow it did. Captain Jake Morrison met them at the docking port. He was tall for a human, with pale skin and hair the color of rust. His uniform was worn but clean, and he carried himself like a soldier who had seen too many battles. Commander Vexlar, Jake said, extending his hand in the human greeting Lisa had explained. Welcome to Outpost Sentinel. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. Vexlar carefully returned the gesture, clasping Jake's hand. The human's grip was firm but not threatening. Captain Morrison, thank you for the rescue. Without your intervention, my fleet would have been destroyed. We couldn't let that happen, Jake said, leading them through corridors that mixed human and alien technology. Lisa's transmission said you were Coalition. That means something to us, even after all this time. Our ancestors knew your ancestors. We're not about to let you die on our doorstep. They entered a command center where dozens of humans worked at stations displaying tactical information. Vexlar noticed something immediately. Everyone here looked ready for battle. Weapons were within easy reach. Emergency gear hung on every wall. This wasn't a military base. It was a civilization on permanent war footing. A human woman approached, her hair tied back and her dark eyes sharp with intelligence. Commander Vexlar. I'm Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, Tactical Officer. Captain Morrison asked me to brief you on our current situation. She brought up a holographic display showing the quarantine zone and surrounding space. Red markers indicated devourer positions. Blue showed human assets. Green marked coalition territory, far to the west. We've been monitoring the devourer expansion for 60 years, Amy explained. They've consumed 1,200 systems in that time. Our projections show they'll reach coalition core worlds within 10 years, at current expansion rates. You've known about this threat and said nothing? Pelton asked, his voice sharp with accusation. Amy's expression didn't change. We've been in quarantine. By our own choice and galactic law. Breaking that quarantine meant reopening debates. We spent 2,000 years trying to settle. It meant admitting we might still be the dangerous species our ancestors feared they were. Dangerous, Vexillar repeated. I've seen your combat effectiveness, but the old stories claimed humans were capable of far worse than what we witnessed. The stories don't even cover half of it, Jake said quietly. Our ancestors created weapons that could sterilize entire solar systems. They fought wars that lasted centuries and killed trillions. By the end, they scared themselves more than they scared any enemy. So, they locked themselves away and tried to become something better. Did you succeed? Lidarnell asked. Jake smiled sadly. We're still trying. Every day. But 2,000 years of peace doesn't erase what we are. When the Devourers first appeared at our borders 50 years ago, we fell back into old patterns like putting on comfortable clothes. The warrior culture we thought we'd buried was just sleeping. An alarm interrupted the conversation. A young human at a sensor station called out, Captain Morrison, emergency transmission from Coalition Central Command. One of their core worlds is under attack. The Devourers have broken through the defensive lines. The tactical display shifted, showing a planet surrounded by red markers. Thousands of ships swarmed around a blue-green world that reminded Vexillar of the Coalition homeworld of Kryn Prime. How many civilians? Jake asked. 4 billion, Amy said. Mixed species colony. Mostly families. The Coalition fleet is outnumbered 8-1. They're requesting any available reinforcements. Jake looked at Vexillar. That your people? Yes. Civilian colony on Meridian 4. They won't last more than a few hours against that force. Jake was quiet for a moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he didn't want to speak. Then, he touched his communication device. Morrison to all ships. Emergency deployment. Civilian population under attack. We're going to help. Captain, a voice responded. We don't have authorization from Earth Command. The High Council hasn't voted to break quarantine yet. Then I'll face the consequences later, Jake said. I'm not letting 4 billion people die while bureaucrats debate. Any ship and crew willing to volunteer. Meet at Staging Point Delta in 20 minutes. We launch with or without official approval. Within 15 minutes, 37 human ships had volunteered. Some were military vessels, like Jake's ship, the Defiant. Others were converted civilian ships, trading vessels outfitted with weapons. A few looked barely spaceworthy, held together with hope and welding. You'd risk your lives for people you've never met? Vexillar asked. Amy looked at him with an expression that was part sadness, part determination. It's what we do. It's what we've always done. For better or worse. We can't sit by and watch people die when we have the power to help. The fleet launched, human and coalition ships together. The journey to Meridian 4 took 6 hours, at maximum speed. During that time, Amy worked with Vexillar's tactical team, sharing human combat doctrine. We don't fight like you, she explained. Coalition tactics focus on defensive positions, calculated risks, preserving forces. That works against normal enemies. But the Devourers don't care about their own casualties. They just keep coming. So what do you do differently? Pelton asked. We match their aggression. We take risks they don't expect. Most species retreat when damaged. We adapt and keep fighting. Most species surrender when defeat seems certain. We find new ways to win. Amy pulled up combat footage from the border battles. Watch this. The video showed a human ship, engines destroyed and drifting. A Devourer cruiser moved in for the kill. At the last moment, the human ship vented all remaining atmosphere through one side, creating thrust that spun them around. They fired their remaining weapons directly into the enemy's reactor core at point-blank range. Both ships exploded. They sacrificed themselves, Liranel said. They bought time for the evacuation ships to escape, Amy corrected. In that battle, 3,000 civilians got away because of that sacrifice. To us, that's not suicide. That's mathematics. 3 lives for 3,000. We'd make that trade every time. They arrived at Meridian 4 to find chaos. The Coalition defense fleet was shattered. Scattered remnants trying desperately to protect the evacuation transports. The Devourers swarmed like insects, their ships blocking escape routes. All Coalition ships. This is Captain Morrison, of Earth Defense Ship Defiant. We're here to help. Follow our lead and cover the evacuation. The human ships didn't wait for formation or careful planning. They dove straight into the Devourer swarm, firing as they went. Jake's ship led the charge, targeting the largest enemy vessels to draw attention away from the transports. Vexlar watched from his command deck as the battle unfolded. A human ship lost its shields but continued fighting, using its hull as a battering ram. Another had its weapons destroyed, so it positioned itself as a shield for damaged Coalition vessels. When a transport full of civilians found its path blocked, 2 human fighters flew directly at the enemy blockade and detonated their fuel cells, clearing the way. On the ground, human Marines had inserted to help with the evacuation. Sergeant Ben Walsh led a squad through the burning capital city, moving from shelter to shelter and gathering survivors. When his team found a group of children trapped in a collapsed building, they didn't hesitate. They held position against Devourer ground forces for 2 hours, buying time for rescue teams to dig the children out. Ben took a hit to his shoulder but kept firing. When his ammunition ran low, he used debris as weapons. When his squadmate fell, he carried the wounded soldier while still coordinating defensive fire. The transmission from his helmet camera was broadcast across the fleet. "Come on, you ugly bastards," Ben shouted at the Devourers. "You want these kids? You go through me first." And somehow, against all logic, he held. His squad held. The children were rescued. The evacuation continued. By the time the last transport cleared the planet, the humans had lost 11 ships and 47 ground personnel. But 4 billion people were alive because of them. Jake's ship docked with Vexlar's flagship, heavily damaged but still operational. The human captain looked exhausted, his uniform torn and blood-stained. "Your people are insane," Pelton said, but there was awe in his voice. Jake laughed tiredly. "Yeah, probably. But we're alive, and so are 4 billion civilians. I'll take insane over dead any day." Vexlar extended his hand in the human gesture. "Thank you, Captain Morrison. You saved my people." "We saved our people," Jake corrected, gripping Vexlar's hand firmly. "It's not always smart, and it doesn't always work, but it's who we are." As the combined fleet began the journey back to human space, Vexlar understood something important. The myths had been wrong about humans. They weren't monsters or demons. They were people who couldn't stand by and watch others suffer. People who would sacrifice everything for strangers. People whose greatest strength and greatest weakness was the same thing. They cared too much to quit. And that made them the most dangerous allies the galaxy had ever seen. The rescue of Meridian 4 changed everything. News of human intervention spread across Coalition space like wildfire. Ancient fears mixed with new hope. The species that had been whispered about for 2,000 years was real, and they had saved 4 billion lives. But the news reached Earth as well, and the reaction there was far from united. Ambassador Kate Sullivan arrived at Outpost Sentinel 3 days after the battle. She was older than most of the military personnel, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. She brought with her a message from the Earth High Council, and her expression told Vexlar it wasn't good news. Captain Morrison, Kate said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. You've created a political crisis. Half the council wants to give you a medal. The other half wants to court-martial you for breaking the quarantine without authorization. Jake stood at attention, but his voice was steady. I'd make the same choice again, Ambassador. 4 billion people were going to die. I know. And that's exactly the problem. Kate turned to address everyone in the command center. For 2,000 years, humanity has debated the same question. Are we ready to rejoin the galaxy, or are we still too dangerous? Every generation thinks they've evolved beyond our violent past. Then something like this happens, and we fall back into old patterns instantly. She brought up a holographic display showing Earth and the inner colonies. The High Council is split 3 ways. The isolationists want to reinforce the quarantine and cut all contact with the coalition. The interventionists want to commit our full military to helping fight the devourers. And the militarists see this as an opportunity to prove human strength, to show the galaxy we're not afraid anymore. What do you want, Ambassador? Vexlar asked. Kate looked at him with sad eyes. I want what's impossible. I want us to help without losing ourselves in the process. I want us to prove we've changed while using all the terrible skills we learned in the old wars. I want to save the galaxy without becoming the monsters who destroyed it last time. Last time? Liranel asked. What do you mean? The room fell silent. Kate looked to Jake, who nodded slightly. She took a deep breath. There's something you need to understand about the ancient war, the one that led to our quarantine. We didn't just fight among ourselves. We nearly destroyed the entire galactic community, and the devourers. She paused, choosing her words carefully. They're our fault. Vexlar felt his blood run cold. Explain. A new figure entered the room, a human man in a dark uniform with intelligence insignia. I'm Lieutenant Commander Chris Taylor, Human Military Intelligence. I've been researching the Devourer genetic structure, comparing it to our old military archives. He looked sick. The Devourers are descended from a bioweapon humanity deployed during the ancient war. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Pelton stood abruptly. His crest flared in anger. You're saying humanity created these monsters? Not deliberately, Chris said. The bioweapon was designed to target a specific enemy species during the war. It was supposed to be contained, controlled. But war is chaos. The weapon mutated, spread beyond its intended targets. It consumed the species it was meant to destroy and kept evolving. By the time we realized what was happening, it was too late. You tried to stop it? Liranel asked. We tried everything, Kate said. We spent 50 years fighting the creatures we'd accidentally created. Millions died on both sides. Finally, we managed to drive them to the edge of known space. We thought we'd contained them. We thought given enough time, they'd die out or evolve into something harmless. But they didn't, Vexlar said. No. They adapted. They spread into the deep, dark, consuming whatever they found. And they waited. 2,000 years of evolution, driven by the survival instinct we accidentally gave them. Kate's voice broke slightly. Every world they've destroyed, every life they've taken, it all traces back to one human decision made in desperation during a war that should never have happened. The silence in the room was absolute. Finally, Torvas spoke, his old voice thoughtful. You kept this secret for 2,000 years. We kept many secrets, Kate admitted. When we sealed ourselves in the quarantine zone, we brought with us knowledge of weapons and tactics that could devastate civilizations. We locked it all away, hoping future generations would never need it. But we also knew that if the bioweapon ever returned, we were the only ones who might be able to stop it. Can you stop it? Vexlar asked. Chris pulled up genetic models and weapon schematics that made the coalition officers step back in fear. The original bioweapon was based on targeted genetic modification. In theory, we could create a counter-agent, something that would revert the devourers to their pre-weapon state. You mean cure them? Amy asked. Cure them. Revert them. Give them back their original form. The species the weapon was based on was sentient, peaceful even. If we could strip away the modifications, we might be able to restore that. Why haven't you tried? Pelton demanded. Because it requires accessing weapons archives that have been sealed since the quarantine, Kate said. Archives that contain information on planet killers, starbreakers, and genetic weapons that make the bioweapon look tame. Opening those vaults, even for a good reason, breaks the most sacred promise humanity made to itself and the galaxy. A transmission interrupted them. The communication officer looked pale. Ambassador, we're receiving a priority alert from Coalition Deep Space Monitoring. The Devourer fleet is changing behavior. They're converging, pulling back from multiple fronts. The tactical display showed the Devourer forces across the galaxy shifting course. All of them, thousands of ships, beginning to move in the same direction, toward the quarantine zone. They know, Chris said, his voice hollow. Their genetic memory must have triggered fully. They recognize human technology, human tactics. They remember that we created them. And they're coming to destroy us before we can do it again, Jake finished. The display showed the full scale of what was approaching. The entire Devourer swarm, collected over 2,000 years of expansion, focusing on a single target. It wasn't just a fleet, it was an extinction event. How long do we have? Kate asked. 3 weeks, maybe 4, the officer replied. Kate turned to Vex'Lar. Now you know the truth. Humanity isn't the mysterious savior from the myths. We're the species that created the nightmare you've been fighting. We're the reason trillions have died across the galaxy. And now the Devourers are coming to finish what we started 2,000 years ago. Vex'Lar looked at the approaching swarm, then at the humans around him. Jake, who had risked everything to save strangers. Amy, who fought with precision and honor. Ben, who had held the line for children he'd never met. They weren't the monsters of legend. They were people trying to be better than their past. What will you do? Vex'Lar asked Kate. The ambassador's face hardened with determination. I'm going back to Earth to convince the High Council to open the sealed archives. We're going to finish what our ancestors started. We're going to fix our mistake, even if it costs us everything. You'll need help, Vex'Lar said. Coalition forces will stand with you. Kate smiled sadly. Even knowing what you know? Even knowing we're responsible for all of this? Especially because of that, Vex'Lar said. You're trying to make it right. You could have stayed hidden, safe behind your quarantine. Instead, you're facing the consequences of your ancestors' actions. That's not something monsters do. That's what heroes do. Jake placed his hand on Kate's shoulder. The ambassador is right that we need to access the old weapons. But she's wrong about one thing. This won't cost us everything. Because this time, we're not fighting alone. This time, we have allies who know what we are and stand with us anyway. The room filled with a different kind of silence. Not the heavy silence of revelation, but the quiet determination of people making a choice. Humans and coalition. Former myths and current reality. Standing together against the darkness they had all, in different ways, helped create. 3 weeks? Kate said. We have 3 weeks to open vaults that should stay sealed forever. Create a weapon that might save or doom us all. And convince both our peoples that working together is worth the risk. Then we better get started, Amy said. The preparations began immediately. Human ships would escort Kate back to Earth for the Council vote. Coalition forces would begin evacuation of border worlds. And somewhere in the sealed military archives, buried under 2,000 years of dust and regret, lay the knowledge that might save the galaxy or destroy it. The myths were dead. The truth was worse. But sometimes, Vexlar thought. The truth was also the only path to redemption. The Earth High Council chamber was older than the quarantine itself. Representatives from every human colony sat in the circular room, their faces projected on screens for those joining remotely. The debate had raged for 3 days, and Kate Sullivan was exhausted. Opening the sealed archives is madness, declared Council member Victoria Price, leader of the isolationist faction. Those weapons were buried for a reason. Once we break that seal, there's no going back. Staying hidden while the galaxy burns is also madness, countered Council member Raymond Hall, speaking for the interventionists. We have the knowledge to stop the Devourers. Using it isn't a choice, it's a responsibility. Admiral Ryan Foster stood, and the room fell silent. He was the highest-ranking military officer in human space, a man whose entire career had been built on defending the quarantine. His next words would matter. "I've spent 40 years guarding the vaults," Ryan said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "I've read the reports from the ancient war. I know what's sealed in those archives. Planet killers that can crack worlds like eggs, genetic weapons that can sterilize entire species, starbreakers that can trigger supernovas." He paused. "And I know that if we open those vaults, some will want to use those weapons. The temptation will be there. Then you're voting against the measure?" Victoria asked. "No," Ryan said firmly. "I'm voting to open the vaults, provide full transparency to the Coalition, and admit to every crime our ancestors committed, because the only way to break the cycle of violence is to face it directly. We can't hide from our past anymore. We can't pretend we're something we're not. We're a species capable of terrible things, yes, but we're also capable of choosing something better." The vote was called. By a margin of 2 votes, the measure passed. The sealed military archives would be opened for the first time in 2,000 years. Kate transmitted the news to Outpost Sentinel, where Vexlar and the human commanders waited. "It's done. Admiral Foster is opening the vaults now. We'll have the data to create a counteragent within 24 hours. And the other weapons?" Jake asked quietly. "Available if needed," Kate admitted. "The Council authorized full access. They're trusting us not to fall back into old patterns. Let's not prove them wrong." The Devourer swarm arrived at the edge of human space exactly 17 days after the revelation. Their fleet numbered in the tens of thousands, a living wall of hunger and ancient rage. They had abandoned their attacks on Coalition territory. Every ship, every creature, focused on one goal: destroying humanity before humanity could destroy them again. The combined human Coalition fleet gathered at the site of the ancient war's final battle. It was a dead system. 3 planets scorched lifeless by weapons that should never have existed. The perfect place for either an ending or a new beginning. Lisa Martinez stood on the bridge of her ship, now officially designated as the scout vessel for the human fleet. She watched the Devourer swarm approach and felt the weight of 2,000 years of history pressing down. "All ships in position," she reported. "Coalition forces on the flanks, human forces in the center, ground teams ready for deployment." The plan was dangerous, maybe impossible. While the fleet held the Devourer's attention, a strike team would infiltrate the Devourer hive nexus and deploy the counteragent. If it worked, the genetic weapon would revert throughout the entire swarm, changing them back to what they had been before humanity's bioweapon corrupted them. If it didn't work, they would all die trying. Admiral Foster's face appeared on every screen in the fleet. "All forces, this is Admiral Foster. 2,000 years ago, our ancestors made a terrible mistake. They created a weapon they couldn't control, and that weapon became the nightmare we face today. Every life the Devourers have taken, every world they've destroyed, carries our responsibility." He paused, letting that truth settle. "But today, we have a chance to make it right. Not by using bigger weapons or fighting harder. By fixing what was broken. By giving the Devourers back what we took from them, their choice, their sentience, their chance to be something other than weapons themselves. Some of you will die today. I won't lie about that. But you'll die trying to heal instead of harm. You'll die trying to break a cycle instead of continuing it. And that matters. That makes all the difference. The Devourer swarm charged. The battle that followed would be remembered in both human and coalition histories as the Day of Reckoning. The human ships fought with the same fierce determination they'd shown at Meridian 4. But this time, they fought not just to survive, but to protect the strike team's mission. Jake Morrison's ship, the Defiant, led the center formation. When 3 Devourer cruisers broke through the line, he didn't retreat. He turned to meet them, his weapons blazing. All ships, with me. We hold this line no matter what. On the Coalition flagship, Vexlar coordinated the defensive formations with precision his ancestors would have recognized. But he did it alongside Amy Rodriguez, combining coalition and human tactics into something new. Something stronger. Below the space battle, the ground assault began. Sergeant Ben Walsh led the joint coalition human strike team into the heart of the Devourer Hive Nexus. The structure was a nightmare of organic technology, pulsing and alive. Devourer ground forces swarmed to defend it. "Keep moving," Ben shouted, firing his weapon at the approaching creatures. "We're not here to fight them. We're here to save them." The team fought through chamber after chamber, taking casualties at every turn. A coalition soldier fell, and a human medic dragged him to safety while still firing. A human was wounded, and a Kryn warrior covered their retreat. They were no longer separate species, fighting side by side. They were one force with one purpose. Ben's squad reached the central chamber, where the Hive Nexus pulsed with sickening energy. This was the heart of the Devourer network, the organic computer that coordinated the entire swarm. "Deploying counter-agent," Ben said, attaching the device to the Nexus. His hands shook slightly. 2,000 years of human mistakes came down to this moment. The device activated. Genetic code flowed into the Nexus, spreading through the Devourer network like light banishing darkness. The counter-agent was designed to rewrite the bioweapons modifications, to restore the original species. In space, the Devourer ships suddenly went still. Not dead, but confused. The hive mind, that had driven them for 2 millennia, began to fracture. And then, something happened that no one expected. The Devourers began to remember. Across the swarm, creatures that had been mindless weapons suddenly recalled lives they'd never lived. Memories flooded back. Genetic echoes of a peaceful species that had existed before humanity's bioweapon consumed them. They remembered art, culture, families. They remembered being people. The battle stopped. Not because one side won, but because both sides realized they weren't fighting enemies anymore. They were facing the victims of an ancient crime. On the flagship, Chris Taylor monitored the genetic changes. "It's working. The counter-agent is reverting them. They're becoming what they were before the weapon changed them." But the transformation came with a cost. Not all Devourers survived the change. Some were too far gone. Their genetics too corrupted by 2,000 years of mutation. They simply ceased to function. Others reverted successfully, but died from the shock of sudden awareness. Those who survived found themselves trapped between what they had been and what they had become. They carried memories of countless atrocities committed while under the hive mind's control. The weight of 2,000 years of murder pressed down on them. A transmission came from the Devourer fleet, hesitant and broken. "We remember. We remember everything. What we were. What you made us. What we did." Ryan Foster responded, his voice heavy with shared guilt. "We remember too. We remember creating the weapon that destroyed you. We remember running instead of fixing our mistake. We're sorry. It's not enough, but we're sorry." "What happens now?" the Devourer asked. Jake Morrison stepped forward. "Now we figure it out together. You're not weapons anymore. You're people again. People who've been hurt, who've hurt others, who need time to heal. We'll help if you let us. Not because we're heroes, but because we owe you that much. The Devourer fleet began to disperse, not fleeing but spreading out. Some ships sought isolation, their crews needing time to process their restored awareness. Others approached the human coalition fleet cautiously, seeking contact, seeking answers. A few Devourer ships turned hostile, their crews consumed by rage at what had been done to them. They attacked both their former swarm mates and the Allied fleet. It was messy, painful, and there were no easy answers. But most chose something different. Most chose to try. The final cost of the battle was heavy. The Defiant had taken critical damage protecting the strike team. Jake Morrison gave the evacuation order, but he stayed at his post, manually controlling the ship's weapons to cover the escape pods. His last transmission crackled across the fleet. Humans don't quit. We just find new ways to win. Remember that. Bye. The Defiant's reactor detonated, taking 3 Devourer ships with it. Ships whose crews had chosen to continue fighting rather than accept their restored awareness. 3 weeks later, Kate Sullivan stood before a joint session of the Galactic Coalition Assembly. It was the first time a human had addressed the body in 2,000 years. "We were the nightmare you whispered about," she said to the assembled representatives. "We were the weapons that scared the dark. But we were also scared children who made terrible mistakes and spent 2 millennia trying to atone. The Devourers were our creation, our responsibility, our shame." She paused, looking at the faces of species old and new. "But you chose to stand with us anyway. You helped us fix what we broke. You showed us that redemption isn't something you achieve alone. It's something you build together." Moving forward, humanity rejoins the Galactic Coalition. Not as the dominant species, not as saviors, as equals, as partners, as people who understand that the greatest strength isn't the ability to destroy, but the courage to heal. Vexlar watched from the Coalition delegation, his 4 eyes bright with emotion. Beside him, Amy Rodriguez sat as the official human military liaison. The myths were gone. The truth was complicated and painful and real. On the memorial wall at Outpost Sentinel, new names joined the ancient lists. Jake Morrison, the 43 ground troops lost in the Hive assault, the Coalition soldiers who died buying time for others. Human and alien names side by side, honoring those who gave everything to break a cycle of violence that had lasted 2,000 years. Ben Walsh, promoted and scarred, stood before the wall and saluted. "We did it. Captain," he said to Jake's name. "We found a new way to win. Not by being stronger or meaner or more willing to die. By being willing to fix what was broken, even when it cost us everything." Lisa Martinez joined him. Her own ship now designated as the official liaison vessel between human and former Devourer territories. "He'd be proud," she said. "We all would be." The galaxy had changed. Humanity was no longer a myth or a monster. They were just people, flawed and fierce and trying their best. And somehow, that was exactly what the galaxy needed. In the end, the greatest human characteristic wasn't their capacity for violence or their stubborn refusal to quit. It was their ability to look at their own worst mistakes and choose to do better. Not perfectly, not without cost, but better. And that choice, made over and over again, was what finally broke the cycle of the ancient war and opened the door to something new. Something that might, eventually,